you guys are going to want a burger and fries for lunch because, yeah, I was watching that. I was like, I know it's just a constellation, but now I want a burger and fries really bad. All right. So how many of you guys, you loved playing Connect the Dots as kids? Like, I still do, yeah. Like it's fun because as you connect the dots and you connect more dots, the picture starts to become more clear. You can figure out what it is. It's super fun. And so it's one of those things that you do and then it's like so satisfying you want to just do again and find another puzzle and do again. It's similarly, like I loved being able to play with Legos when I was a kid, right? Legos are amazing. In fact, if I made the time for it, it would probably be a good de-stressor for me to play with Legos because I still really like doing that kind of thing. It's actually really good for brain development. Like all the like toys that they come out with nowadays are like mostly garbage, but Legos, that develops your brain. The people who played Legos as kids are way smarter than everybody else. I'm just telling you that. Like so, so if you played Legos growing up, you're smarter than everybody else in the room, and if you didn't, Legos will help with that. But no, but here's the thing. Listen up. If you are trying to connect the dots, but you're missing some dots, like that can be pretty devastating, right? You can get a very wrong picture of what's supposed to happen if you're missing some of the dots that are supposed to connect things to give you the answers. Like, Basically, Legos prepared me for adulthood because as I got good at putting together Legos and stuff and following the little pictures and the directions, that really just prepared me for adulthood when I would have to put together IKEA furniture. So the difference is when I was an adult, I got cocky and thought I could put together the IKEA furniture without the instructions. It turns out you can't because I have a nightstand in our bedroom to this day with the front that's on backwards. Because I didn't follow directions fully. I missed a page. When you miss a page and you don't connect the dots between those pages, you put things on backwards. And once I got it put together, Chelsea looks at me, she goes, "That's on backwards." And I should have seen that because everything else is white and that was like wood. So I was like, "Oh, I thought that was an accent piece." She's like, "No, that's on backwards." And if I'm honest, I kind of knew it near the end, but I was so far into it, if I were to fix it, I was going to have to take the whole thing apart just to fix that one piece. So to this day, we still have a backwards nightstand in our bedroom. So following directions is really crucial and important in life. And so if you didn't play with Legos growing up, you still have every opportunity now because your brains will still develop until you're 25. So you still develop that brain strength and learn, prepare yourself to be able to put together IKEA furniture for when you're older because you'll wish you had that life skill. But we all know what it's like to not understand something, right? It's super frustrating when the pieces aren't coming together and you can't make sense of it. It's like kind of like when your math teacher gives you a saying to help you remember the equation, right? Except when they say the saying, it just makes it more confusing for you. Anybody have that experience? Like they're trying to help you, and like half the class is like, "Oh yeah, okay, that'll help me remember it," and you're like, "What does that have to do with math?" And it's like sometimes when you don't get it, it doesn't quite connect the dots, and it doesn't really be that helpful. Or maybe it's when your coach makes you run the same drills over and over and over again to prepare for the next game, and you're like really tired, and you're like, "I know that this is supposed to help me somehow, but I'm not sure how this is supposed to help us win." It's kind of like Karate Kid, we're like wax on, wax off, and he has no idea, but really he starts to fight, and you're like, whoa, and then it comes together. Anybody seen Karate Kid? You guys? Okay, so it's like connecting the dots to like what makes things work. Whenever you can't connect the dots to why, it makes it really frustrating. It's hard to find why it is that we're doing things, and I think the same thing happens to our faith, right? How many of you've heard me say something, or your small group leader say something, or you've had something that was talked about in discussion, and like you're kind of nodding along, but maybe when you go back home, you're like, "What does that have to do with my faith?" Like and you're trying to connect the dots. We all experience this in all different kinds of areas in our lives, but especially when it comes to faith, it can be more frustrating. It's when you hear things like you should do more prayer, or reading the Bible, or listening to worship music, or maybe it's come to church every week. or maybe it's talking to someone older and wiser in your life. When you hear these things, they're good. They, like, yeah, you can kind of nod and follow along. Maybe it's other stuff too, but you hear that, and then maybe when you're living your actual life, you're like, how does this help me? Right? And so faith, it can be frustrating, because I think when it comes to our faith and connecting the dots between all the different parts of our lives and how our faith is supposed to look, it can be frustrating because we have a misconception. We think that in order to grow our faith, that we have to do more of something, which is kind of half true, but it's not the whole thing. It actually misses a pretty crucial dot that needs connected. But we think that growing our faith means knowing more, or being more, or learning more, or doing more. And you guys with me? Like it requires more of something in order to grow your faith. And yes, that's kind of true, but it's not the whole truth. But some people think that you can grow your faith simply by, for instance, coming to church, right? How many of you guys know people who come to church every week and they're like the meanest person ever, right? It's you. No, I'm just kidding. So you're all raising your hands and the person next to you is pointing at you. So like, this is a real thing, because you've seen people like this. Coming to church doesn't just make you a better Christian, right? Any more than like learning how to swim. Like, how many of you've learned how to swim? You didn't learn how to swim by just watching YouTube videos on how to swim, right? You didn't pass the test at school simply by showing up, right? You actually had to get to the swimming pool and practice your strokes and learn to actually float and swim. You had to actually take your writing utensil and fill out the test correctly in order to pass. Showing up, just learning the information isn't enough to make you accomplish anything. You have to actually do part of it, right? So it's not just showing up, right? But also a lot of people, especially when it comes to faith, maybe they think that it's more than just showing up. They have that piece right, but they think it's just learning more. Right? If you could just listen to more sermons, watch more Christian YouTubers, soak up all the information at church, maybe memorize the passages, and if you just learn more, then maybe you will have a deeper faith. And again, that's part of it. But that in and of itself, learning more doesn't actually mean you'll have a better faith. And I'll prove it to you, right? How many of you guys know that a burger and fries is actually really not good for you? Do you guys know that? Am I letting the cat out of the bag? Okay. How many of you does that change your mind about wanting to go get a burger and fries for lunch after church? Right? Just because you know that it's bad for you doesn't mean you're going to not do it, right? So knowing more does not equal doing better, right? So just showing up to church does not necessarily mean that you're going to grow your faith. And knowing a lot about God or the Bible doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to grow your faith. There's something else that we have to connect the dots from knowing more, learning more, being more, doing more, and actually having a faith that is alive and active. You with me so far? You have a question?
It's like the line of the witch in the wardrobe.
C.S. Lewis reference. I like it.
The kid wants more of that.
Turkish delight?
Yeah, Turkish delight. The witch blinds him.
Yes.
So that he could sort of don't, but he could Narnia.
I like the C.S. Lewis reference. I love Chronicles of Narnia. She's talking about how she tried to get, is Edmund, to, I almost said Edward, it's Edmund. And she tries to get him to come around more by giving him more Turkish delight. And his siblings. Yeah, she tried to bribe him to get his siblings. So yeah, it's kind of, I get where you're going with that. More, right? We think that more is better. Certainly Edmund thought more Turkish delight was better than no more Turkish delight. So you got to be careful about bribery and temptation. Maybe that fits more with temptation. But here's the thing. If we want to actually grow our faith to be alive and active, we have to learn what dots connect the knowing more, the doing more, learning more, being more, to actually having a growing faith. Make sense? So that's what kind of we're going to talk about today. And if just showing up, if just learning more doesn't actually connect the dots, give you all the information you need, and if God wants your faith to grow, then what are those missing dots? How exactly do we grow our faith? And that's the question we're going to be answering in this whole series. This is a 5-week series. We're going to be in it for the rest of the month. And it's a perfect way to start the new year, because how many of you feel super motivated at the beginning of the year? It's like a clean slate, fresh start. You're like, all right, I'm going to do things better in 2022 than I did in 2021, right? There's a sense of like, okay, maybe I'm not super motivated, but at least I'm a little bit more motivated than I was a couple of weeks ago. This is the perfect opportunity to maybe motivate yourself, to maybe latch onto something and try to. I would urge you guys to stay committed to coming to church, even though we're talking about just coming to church isn't enough, right? But it is a piece of the puzzle, and I encourage you, make sure you're here every week. If you miss it, watch it on YouTube, because this is going to be a really impactful series for you to be able to grow your faith on your own, which is what we all want. So if God wants you to grow your faith, how exactly do we do this? And in order to do that, we have to, I'm just going to tell you the missing dot. You guys want to know the missing dot to connect your faith to these things? It's not just knowing more, doing more, being more. It's one thing that connects us to growing our faith, okay? It's the Sunday school answer. Knowing Jesus changes everything, right? Knowing Jesus changes everything when it comes to the faith element, okay? It's not just about what you can know or what you can do. It's about who you're doing it with and who you're doing it for. And knowing Jesus changes absolutely everything about that. When Jesus has an active role in your life, when His Spirit's living inside of you and you're pursuing Him every day, your faith will grow. So here's how we connect the dots to how that happens. And in order to do that, we're going to go to a part in Jesus' life and His ministry. It's near the beginning of His ministry, and it's recorded by His disciple Matthew. So Matthew was one of Jesus' 12 disciples, followed Him around for 3.5 years, was writing down the things that happened. And so he's writing down one time where Jesus was talking on the side of a mountain, and because He was teaching on the side of a mountain, they called this the Sermon on the Mount, because He was teaching He gave a sermon on the side of a mountain. Anyway, so that's what it's called. And in this Sermon on the Mount, He was teaching people actually what it means to grow your faith, what it means to have a relationship with God. And He's connecting the dots between the things that they had heard, things that we can read from our Old Testament, and actually how that is applied in your life practically today. You want to know the Father, this is how you do it. And so one of the main bottom lines of what He was saying was basically what we know is not nearly as important as what we do. Okay? One of the most crucial ways to grow your faith is knowing that is knowing what to do with what you know. One of the most crucial ways to grow your faith is knowing what to do with what you know. And so in order to kind of drive this point home, he gives a little parable and a little analogy, and this is what he says in Matthew chapter 7. He says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is what? Wise. He's kind of like a person who builds a house upon a solid rock. Though the rain comes and torrents and floodwaters rise and the winds beat against the house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. Now, how many of you guys know a whole lot about construction? Right? How many of you don't know a whole lot about construction? Okay. Here's something that you should know for those of you who don't. You can't just find a plot of land and build on it. Right? You have to actually grade the land. You have to actually put it on something that will withstand and hold a house on it securely. In other words, you have to have a foundation. Did you say pipe? You have to have a pipe? Oh, a plan. Okay, that's good. You have to have a plan, but you also have to have a plan for how the house fits on a foundation that will hold the house secure, that will support it. And so he's telling us, you guys have heard, you heard the song in elementary school, the rains came down and the floods came up. Do you remember this song?
No.
Wise man built his house upon the... Okay, anyway, you should YouTube it, because you'll take you back to kids' church. But basically he's saying there's two guys. One built his house really fast so that he could enjoy it, and he just built it on some sand real quick, right? And it was great. It looked awesome, and he was chilling before sundown. But this other guy, he was smart, and see, he knew the best way was to make it secure and work on the foundation. So he spent all this time building the foundation into rock, which is a lot more work. It took him a lot more time. So while the guy who built his house on the sand was just chilling and hanging out and enjoying his house, the wise guy was actually taking the time and putting in the effort to build it on a solid foundation. Well, eventually, the wise guy finally finishes his house, and a storm comes, and the guy who built his house on the sand, it all came crashing down. But the guy who built his house on the rock, it could withstand the storm. It made it. In fact, when I was graduating high school, it was 10 years ago now. So there was something, maybe you heard it on the news, maybe you were too young. 10 years ago, you guys would have been pretty young. But there was a tornado in Joplin, Missouri. So that's where I'm from. It was like the biggest tornado to be documented in the United States in like over 50 years. So it was a massive EF5 tornado, and I remember walking outside my house after it happened and not being able to recognize where I was. Right? It was crazy. Luckily, my house didn't get destroyed, but like a block away, everything else was leveled. So like, I remember coming out and seeing everything. And what was crazy is like tornadoes are funny. Like they can knock over trees, and yet the grill brush was still right on the grill and hadn't moved. Right? Weird stuff. But there were houses in the midst of this like miles long stretch of land that was like decimated by the tornado. There were houses that still stood and withstood the storm. It's kind of crazy. I have a picture to show you. This actually isn't Joplin because I couldn't find a good picture online. But if you've ever seen pictures of like tarnage after a tornado, and you see one house that's standing, it's kind of cool, right? There's actually a lot of stories going around. There were lots of churches that like houses were down around them, but the church was still standing. It was kind of cool. And there's lots of little stories that I don't have time to get into right now, but it was cool to see God move even in such a tragic situation. But houses that are built right, are built solid, can withstand far more than those that aren't. And so, it kind of like the house like that you see in this picture. If you take the time, if you build it on a foundation that's firm and right, it can withstand storms, which is what you want in a house. You don't want a house that can crumble in on top of you. And so that's the point that Jesus is making. He's saying, your faith will grow and will be able to withstand the storms of life if you built it on a solid foundation. And what is that foundation? Do you guys remember the verse, what Jesus said? What's the foundation of a solid house or a solid faith? Here, let's go back to the verse. It says, anyone who listens to what? My teaching and what? Follows it is like a wise person who builds his house on solid rock. So whoever listens to my teaching and follows my teaching. There's two things there that's really important, okay? So if you want a faith that can withstand the storms of life, it has to be built upon Jesus' teaching, and you have to follow it. If you listen to Jesus' teaching and follow it, your house, your faith will be on a strong foundation. And when the storm comes, it will be able to stand. Because let me tell you something. Storms will come in your life. Some of you, you've already experienced some pretty significant storms in your life. But one thing that's guaranteed is that until Jesus comes back again, there's lots of sin in this world. And that means we're going to have storms in our life. There's going to be bad things that happen. But if you want your faith to withstand those things, if you still want to actually even grow in the midst of those things, there's a saying that storms make the roots grow stronger. Like, if you want your faith to grow stronger and to be able to continue to stand firm in the midst of the storms of life that you face, you have to build it upon listening to Jesus' teachings and following what he said. You do those two things, and that's a great way to connect your faith to a faith that grows. The same is true about the solid foundation for a house as it is for our faith, that actions can grow your faith. Imagine a bunch of builders knew that you have to build a house on a strong foundation, but they chose to just build it on the dirt because they didn't feel like putting the concrete and laying the rock. What if they didn't feel like doing the work and they knew it, but they just took the lazy route and built it on? Like, that would be a bad thing. You have to not only know, listen to Jesus' teaching, but you have to follow it. Do the hard work, build the foundation, right? It takes both of those things for your faith to thrive. Actions can grow your faith, which is something that we don't typically think of. We think about, and this is true, like actions are like a byproduct of your faith. If you have an active faith, then your actions will show it, right? There's this also another analogy in the Bible about trees and fruit, and if you're a good tree, you'll bear good fruit. Like, that's true, but also actions can be a part of the very thing that grows your faith, right? Actions can help you grow your faith. So in other words, if we're to take that verse, like to listen and follow, those are the two application points for this week's message. As we're beginning this whole series off, it's not just enough to show up and learn stuff, okay? It's part of it. You do have to show up. You do have to learn stuff, but then you have to do what you learn. Just like knowing that a burger and fries isn't the healthiest thing, you have to actually follow what you know and to just not eat that for every single meal, right? If you want to have an active faith, you have to learn and do. Learning is the first step. So come to church, read your Bible, spend time in the Word, watch Christian YouTubers, all the good stuff. Like, that's good. Learn, soak it in. It's kind of hard to know, like, how many of you want a boyfriend or girlfriend someday? Let's be honest. You want that person to spend your life with and to share, right? You're going to be able to do a better job at loving that person if you actually know them, right? Like, if you know that they hate flowers, you're not going to spend money on buying flowers, right? If you know they're allergic, don't do it, right? But you have to know them in order to love them well. So the same is true in your relationship with God. You have to know Him in order to know how to have a relationship with Him. So knowing and learning is part of it. Learn about God. Spend time with Him. Spend time. Ask questions. Talk to your small group leader. Talk to me. Secondly, do what you learn, right? Maybe that is spending time and carving it out of your day to talk to God and having prayer time. Maybe that is memorizing a Bible verse so that you can know how to apply it when it counts, right? How many of you guys lost power this week with that big surge that happened in Franklin? Like, we lost power the schools lost power. We lost power to our house for 4 hours in the middle of the night, and it was like 5 degrees outside, so it got really cold really fast. So that was not fun. But what happens if you lose power someday and you need a Bible verse, but your Wi-Fi won't connect? You need to have stuff memorized. You need to have it as a part of who you are. So memorize God's Word. Maybe that's an action step for you. Maybe it's other stuff. Maybe it's actually putting into practice to love your neighbor as yourself, because it's really hard to love people sometimes. So maybe that's the action step for you this week. I don't know what it is, but actions will help you grow your faith. That's the big point of today's message. So as you go into small group, here's my question for you, okay? What's one question that you have about growing your faith? We talked about a lot of stuff. We introduced a lot of stuff today. So maybe you have other things in mind, about what things can grow your faith, but what's one question you have when it comes to growing your faith? You guys got about 15, 20 minutes to talk about that within your small group. So I'm going to pray, and then you guys can go to your small group. And don't forget to grab one of those info packets for 2022 because it's going to be really important and helpful for you moving forward this year to have all that information. So I'll pray, and you guys will be dismissed to your small groups.